I told him where I was going. Oh, yeah, that's where they call it. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
How about 152 over the 10 acres and then
Well, I didn't want to keep it city council separate from you. Say, yeah. Everybody ready?
Good evening. I call to order the City of Gerald special call meeting for a City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission joint workshop and special call Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Tuesday, January 16th, 2024 at 7 p.m. First item on the agenda is going to be a roll call. We have one member. Not here? For the City Council. So the next item on the agenda is going to be an invocation and pledge of allegiance led by Councilmember Clausen.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to collaborate with planning and zoning as we all work together for the city of Gerald. We are very grateful for our safety during the inclement weather, and we we're grateful that our first responders and were here to protect us and make the necessary changes of which our citizens spoke up for. But we're very proud to say that we were able to listen and respond as the need presented, and we ask that you continue to let those needs be met and that we prosper in that direction. And we ask that you continue to bless and protect all of our first responders. May we all continue to work together for the will in the city of Gerald, your will in the city of Gerald. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll call the city planning and zoning commission to order. We're gonna dispense with the roll call invocation, pledge of allegiance. It's already been done. We need to ask for public comments. I don't think there.
I don't think we-
Not any way. Okay, very good. Okay, then we'll move on.
Alright, the next item on the agenda item number 4, we're having a workshop. Purpose of this public workshop is to allow presentation and discussion regarding an update to chapter 4 of the Unified Development Code. There will be no formal action taken. Good evening.
You got a slide?
What?
Slide.
There we go. Well, good evening, Mayor, thank you, council. Pleasure to be with y'all here again this evening. I think last time just as a refresher, my name is Ethan Harlow, I'm a planner of Kinley Horn Associates. Last time we met before Christmas, we went through and discussed both an update to the permitted use table in chapter 4 and we did kind of a visual preference survey exercise, kind of identifying what types of development here in general you wanted to see, what you felt was in line with your comprehensive plan and your vision for the community. So today I'm here to present really your final draft ordinance to you guys. We'll start by just reviewing some of what we heard at our last workshop before Christmas. Then we'll jump into the ordinance, talk about the structure of it, where you find different things, help you navigate it. We'll talk about the final updates and tweaks to that permitted use table. And then of course the lot design standards, and then wrap up this evening with the remainder of your agenda. As we go tonight, there are a few places where I've placed slides in here that's a question. Please feel free to stop me at any time though, but do know after each section, there is a place in here if you want to hold your question until the end, and we can kind of cover all of our questions on each section as we go. In front of you guys, there are 3 documents. The first one is a red line version of the ordinance comparing the old with what's changed. It can be a little tricky to read sometimes, just with formatting problems, so there is a clean copy for you there as well. Then the PowerPoint packet is there. That's not the PowerPoint I'm going over today, but it is just some material that may be helpful for you to reference as we go through the PowerPoint. There's a lot of information to fit in one PowerPoint. So. All right, any questions before we get started? Wonderful. Ooh, that's weird. Okay, so at our last meeting, what we did was that visual preference survey talking about the permitted uses. Really, we heard some consistent feedback there. Of course, fix the code, make it functional, make sure our law design standards meet with what we want to see in our community, but also with what the market wants. Utilize our development standards to incentivize the type of development we want, where we want it, and then pursue unique development options like alley-loaded development that aren't common, aren't the first thing developers bring to you here. Ultimately, what we came back to is during our discussion as well were the goals from our comprehensive plan. You know, increasing and diversifying the types of housing available in Gerald, goal 4, and goal 7, being able to foster a thriving and diverse economy of commercial employment and destination amenities. Both of these are going to be reflected in what you see here tonight. We've definitely expanded upon the zoning code, the residential portion, to really allow lots of flexibility in the types of housing and the folks people can do with their property here in Gerald. But also in Goal 7, we really tried to make the zoning code much more accessible, much more functional compared to the code you had, which 1, increases business friendliness, but then 2, makes it very clear for a business owner to understand where they can go here in Gerald and to really make sure that our zoning districts, the developers with our zoning districts are able to create unique commercial centers. So the first Oh, I apologize, I didn't look at your packet. One of the things Jordan should have shared with you is an update to chapter 1. In our last few workshops, we had a lot of discussion about some of the things in the code we just don't understand what they mean. There's no glossary, no set of definitions. So as part of chapter 1, we've created that list of definitions for you guys. I do apologize that handout's not there for you, that is available to review. Every use in your permitted use table is now in that zone, in that list of definitions, so there's no question about what it is. And if you remember, we also increased that number of uses from 52 to 100 and something, just giving you more options and helping you and we organize that table. And then we also added some more technical terms, things like setback, plat, etc., where there may be more nuance and maybe more technical requirement where staff needs assistance from the code to support an interpretation they're making or to understand how to apply the code in a certain situation. So, any questions there? From there, what you do have in front of you is chapter 4 of the UDC. Items here in bold are the sections where we made substantial changes. Really, the overall outline and flow of the code has not changed. You'll still find the same information in the same places. However, these items in bold are what are substantially changed. Most of the information that has changed in chapter 4 is going to be within subsection 11. So these sections E through L here are really, E through J here are what really has changed. We've completely rewritten the lot design standards to match our new zoning districts and a permitted use table. And then we've created a set of instructions basically on how to interpret these things. Okay, you say you have a 10-foot front setback, but what could I put in my front setback type of questions. And then some considerations for special development types, since we do have multiple uses allowed in some zoning districts. For instance, you are allowed townhomes in certain zoning districts now, so how do you treat townhomes in a single family zoning district? Obviously, if they're attached, they don't have, side setbacks, that kind of thing. All right. That's the structure. Any questions? Following up on the permitted use table, what we presented to you before Christmas was really just a draft of that permitted use table. If you remember, we had discussed adding that L to the permitted use table. So creating uses that were permitted by right, some that required the conditional use permit, but also finding that middle ground where uses are not, are permitted with limitations, right? Where you don't have to have the full conditional use permit, you should agree to that set of conditions there before. What we've done now is really complete that list of limitations, that L, for your review. In the packet in front of you is the full permitted use table, so you can see exactly what has the L. I was going to go through every slide. But there are just a few I wanted to point out to you. So at our last meeting, we had lots of discussion about housing types and specifically accessory dwelling units. You'll see here that the accessory dwelling unit is permitted in, the Ag SF1, SF2, and SF3 district with either a conditional use permit or an L, with some limitations. So those limitations, ultimately working with Danielle and Jordan on this, what we decided was that there should be a cap on the size of unit. You don't want somebody having a full second house behind their house, right? But we've tied that to a function of the lot size, so that proportionally someone with a half-acre lot could have an accessory dwelling unit proportional to the size of their property, like somebody with a quarter-acre lot could, but also still be a very livable size. Considering the conditions in certain parts of town with on-street parking, we have required an off-street parking space, and we've put some limitations on how tall they can be, how they can be owned and rented throughout the community, and then how do you work these with the conditions for accessory structures elsewhere. As you go through that list of uses, other things you'll find in there are not quite as intense as what we've done there for accessory dwelling units. On most of your civic uses, what you'll find is that the permitted uses are all about just helping identify where those uses are appropriate in the community. So for instance, with a regional level park, you don't want those on local streets with lots of traffic. You want those out on your collector type roads. When you get into your commercial uses, you'll find conditions on things like gas stations that require certain types of screening or distances and spacings from the pumps to the adjacent single family residences if needed. Okay. Any questions there? That was just a quick update. We wanted to make you guys.
I have a question about the ADUs.
Mhm.
Could you go back to that for me, please?
I can figure out how.
Good job. It says rental of ADU only permitted on owner-occupied properties. Could you go a little more into detail on that?
For sure. What this would mean is that if you had an accessory dwelling unit on your property and you wanted to rent it to someone, that home has to be your primary residence. You couldn't purchase this as an investment property and collect rent on both the home and the ADU.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to be sure I was thinking right.
So now, the real fun, the lot design standards. And completely redoing all the zoning districts and our purpose statements, which are in front of you. That is the back half of that packet. It was necessary to go through and reestablish how we wanted to actually regulate each of these districts. So one of our goals, comprehensive plan goals, our discussion here has been about allowing a variety of housing types and a variety of zoning districts, encouraging creativity in our commercial districts, etc. So what we've tried to do here is simplify the code language as much as we possibly can, make it clear and easy to read, but also incorporate lots of flexibility. So as we talk through these tonight, you'll note that there is smaller lot sizes, options to have increased setbacks or decreased setbacks depending on the design of the product. The special development types I mentioned earlier, like the townhomes, the zero lot line, etc. And all of this is being done through your traditional zoning code components like density regulation, minimum lot widths, minimum lot sizes, setbacks, etc. So if we start working through the permitted use table from left, not permitted use table, the lot design standards table from left to right, you'll note that they're all listed in order of from least intense use to most intense use, as they are in the rest of the code. This top line here is going to be your minimum lot area. In our ag district, we've opted for a 3-acre minimum lot size. Those are those parts of town that are never going to have public services. That contrasts with the SF1 district, where those are properties in the city limits, like we discussed last time, where they will have may have public water, but they won't have public wastewater. They're going to run on septic. Then you see a big jump from our SF1 district into SF2 and SF3. SF2 is your more traditional single-family district. That 5,500 square foot lot size, that's very common for what we're seeing in the market in Williamson County. SF3 would differ from that. That's our smaller district that we anticipate using closer to the core of historic Gerald in Old Town, etc. That has the 3,500 square foot minimum lot size. This district also has the most flexibility in terms of housing types, permitting duplexes, townhomes, etc. Housing types that don't need as large of a footprint as a single-family home might. From there, you jump up into your multifamily districts, the 10,000 square foot minimum for a multifamily 1 district. That's meant to encourage the development of those smaller cottage-style developments. Closer to Old Town in more urban settings. That's why we went with this roughly quarter acre size minimum versus the MF2, which is slightly larger. This is where you are going to have your traditional apartment complexes, things that you want away from Gerald. So this lot size is larger to encourage it away from the small parts of town with smaller blocks and smaller urban structures. We also, before Christmas, had a lot of discussion about the manufactured home zoning district. You'll note there that 3 acre minimum, lot size minimum, that 3 acre lot size minimum really encourages these to be in certain parts of town where you can't acquire 3 acre minimum lots. This really makes it impossible to turn over a residential lot in the city into a manufactured home lot. Then from there, you'll notice in our commercial districts, we don't have any minimum lot area. Right? Really trying to incentivize the use of these wherever is appropriate in the city, whatever configuration they need to be. Your minimum lot width really is not going to change much. You'll note most of them read 50. In some places where you have a larger lot size, 100. Again, that helps determine where in the city they could be, and that also helps to define the character of these areas. If you're in a part of towns of ag, you don't necessarily want to see a driveway every 20 feet. That's part of determining the character of that area. Again, and then the rest of the table, you're really not going to notice much of a difference, save for height. We do try to differentiate a lot of the setbacks, especially when adjacent to residential. You'll notice that the taller the building gets, the larger the setback adjacent to residential gets, or the front setback gets to the street. We don't want to end up in a situation where we have deep canyon-like streets anywhere in Gerald. The only zoning districts with a maximum density are going to be your traditional multifamily districts with that 20 dwelling units an acre and that 30 dwelling units an acre. That will be capped and limited, however, by that 35-foot height and the 45-foot height. And the only place in Gerald, 45 will get you a 3 to 4 story building, depending on what type of building you're using, what style of building you're using. In the use limitations, we've written in some considerations for that, how to make that transition. If you do have a 3 or 4 story building to a single family home, there has to be a stair-step effect. The tallest multifamily that would be permitted would be in that mixed-use district. That's where we require to have that commercial ground floor, vertical above. There folks need lots of density to make those types of projects work. So those would be permitted up to 90 feet of height. Any questions on this so far? So earlier I mentioned that in sections F through J, there are some further guidelines on how to interpret this table and really utilize it. The first of those in section F is going to be your basic rules. Something has to go in my setback: landscaping, driveways, sidewalks, etc. This defines that and then creates guidelines for staff to figure out if there's something not on the list, what to do with that, how can they permit it. It has rules in there for how to interpret the frontage requirement for frontage. Is it frontage on a public road? Is it frontage on a TxDOT road? Is it frontage on a private road? That sort of thing. Then where you may have some questions about certain development types, like the townhomes or the zero lot line development types, it clarifies where these are permitted and how to address them in each of the zoning districts, so there's no question. The zero lot line product, is that something you're very familiar with? No. That's a type of residential product where instead of centering a house on a lot, the developer will shift it all the way to one side or the other, so that it is at the home, the structure is at the property line. It's not very common, but you do see it.
If I may, the townhouses on 3rd Street that just recently went up in the last 2 years, those are zero lot lines. So they had originally platted lots that were 25 feet wide. They smushed them to zero lot line on one end to fit their setback regulations. So that's an example of just something that's local that we can refer back to.
In instance where folks do that, of course you want to make sure that you still have some sort of yard on that lot. That would defeat the purpose of a single family home if you have a yard. You also want to make sure that you're maintaining building separation for your safety codes, fire, and building code. So really what this does is permit zero lot line development, but require that you have to make up the space you took out by shifting a lot on the other sides. The other thing we've tried to focus on in the code was incentivizing rear-loaded development. Rear-loaded development can be difficult to do because it increases your cost dramatically. Essentially, you're building a second road behind your subdivision. So you have to really incentivize and make sure that developers can make up for that lost space, make up for that lost those lost funds from having to build that second road behind your site by fitting more units onto the development. This is an example of a rear-loaded development down in Round Rock. These are single-family homes, probably about 4,500 square foot lots. But you'll notice that you really get a nice effect on the front of the home because it's not interrupted by driveways and garages every 20 feet. Your facades look cohesive, and you really have a nice streetscape there. So what we've done is include terms in the code to help developers make up for providing these alleys, because they will create a nicer look and feel among the community. If a developer provides a rear-loaded alley, in all the zoning districts, we have reduced their front setback so they can pull that up to the street. Think of these are probably illustrating a 10-foot setback here between the curb and the porch, but it creates a nice environment where you can walk down the street, talk to the folks on the porch. And then in the SF2 and SF3 district, we will waive the minimum lot size if you do this. So that helps developers get creative with lotting arrangements and lotting plans to be able to fit these lots in here and make up for the units they lost from providing alleys. We were reading that some communities will allow you to reduce the front setback to 0, but in talking with some civil engineers, it's not always a good idea because a lot of stuff actually has to go in the space here between the home and the lot, right? All of your utilities, water, wastewater, electric, gas, and then you still have to include some landscaping in there. We all know how trees do with water lines. We've only allowed the 0-foot setback, that 0 lot line setback at the front. If your developer chooses to put the utilities in there, there'd be no conflicts. You'll note that what we haven't gone over today are those overlay districts. And as we've discussed at our other workshops, what we're really doing by writing these into the code now is saving a place for them, and then creating a community conversation for y'all to go back later. And through further planning efforts, I work with these communities, specifically in downtown, Old Town, and property owners along I-35 to understand what they want to see in their community, develop a specific set of goals and policies for each of these areas. We don't want to just abstractly write code for them. We want it to reflect what the community actually desires. Any questions on that? I know it's terribly exciting. Setbacks and building heights. All right, so next steps, we're going to continue working with Jordan and Yale. You probably have noticed there's some typos in there, or small errors. We're going to continue working on those before your council consideration in a few weeks. There will be public notice that's sent out to the community that Jordan and Danielle are working on. And then, as I understand it, today P&Z will consider this and council in a few weeks. That's all I got, Jordan. You said keep it short.
Are you gonna be, when we have a meeting with the community or whatever, you're gonna be there with us to help us if we need help?
Give me a call. I'll show up. Always happy to.
So we do have on the agenda today for Planning and Zoning Commission to make a recommendation. It's completely up to you guys if you feel comfortable doing so. The next step in this is y'all's recommendation, so we can't proceed forward without it. We can take more time to review it, we can come back at a later date, whatever you guys feel comfortable with. It's completely up to you at this point if you need more time.
What's wishes on planning and zoning?
Whatever's best for y'all. I'm always flexible with what y'all are looking for.
That sounds reasonable.
I have one question for you. Sorry, this is kind of going back to lot design standards. On the SF3, how did you go down to 3,500 from 6,000 on the minimum lot size? Is that something that's pretty common as far as square footage?
Yeah, the 3,500 square foot is you're seeing more and more in more urban single-family neighborhoods.
Okay.
You're not gonna see it on the edge of Georgetown or out, east of 35. But that's certainly possible, here closer toward the city. And what used to be 6,000, the purpose of that zoning district has really now kind of shifted to that SF2 district. That's your more traditional single family. So what we've really done is kind of create a new category for residential development.
And I will say the applications that we're seeing zoning wise, the pre-development meetings we've had, all of the discussions we've had with developers, they are smaller lots and they're talking about PUDs. And part of the intent of this update was to give us the flexibility to use our base zoning and not have PUDs scattered throughout the city. So that SF3, which is completely up to you guys when we get before boards, respectively, during zoning changes, it's completely at your discretion, but the intent is to provide that flexibility where they're not having to do a PUD. We have the code that addresses these smaller products that also may not be, at the end of the day, the market's shifting. Not many younger generations want, an acre lot with a big old house and all this stuff, and that's just where the market is headed. It also helps make the pro forma work on projects to get development in, so it's that middle spot to try to cover our bases and have a base zoning that allows for this kind of stuff.
I'll also add, we're moving into an era, especially in retail. You already have online shopping that affected retail, you got COVID that affected retail, where you need more rooftops in less space to drive demand for those types of goods and services. And so increasing that density, especially in areas of town where you want to encourage commercial development and walkable types of development is going to be very important to making sure those developments are successful.
And it's not to say that every residential project that comes in is gonna be SF3. We now have a category that they can use instead of going for a PUD. Because I wanna say 2 or 3 PUDs on my desk right now that.
I would rather have SF3s than PUDs, I think, because it really limits, it's just a free-for-all to me in a PUD, I think.
Well, and that's, the majority of things we're seeing fall in line with these lot design standards, so it's not saying that every project is gonna have these standards, it's just, they have the option to come in and ask for it.
Have any more discussion?
Yes.
Question?
Are we going to allow more than 3 stories within the city limits of Gerald? Right now, that's our limitation.
So some of the districts do have above that, the majority of the expandable ones that are much taller than what we're used to is gonna be C3, which is gonna be that really dense highway commercial, regional commercial, we're talking about corridor J and corridor E that's coming in, stuff like that. It's not gonna be in city center or anywhere near here. Same thing with the industrial, you don't want your industrial right next to your residential uses, those are gonna be on the peripheral of the city. Everything else is within essentially what we have now, except for the 40-footer in SF3. But with 40 feet, you're really only getting maybe 3 stories, and it's not, I don't want to say it's typical, or it's not typical for a single-family house, but those unique products, like those townhouses, that would allow them the flexibility to do those projects and not worry about capping out. Because 35 can get you a 2-story, depending on, like you said, depending on how you build the house. So the expanded heights are really only in those areas that are gonna be outside of where we are now. So 35, if 130 expands out this way, whatever that looks like, the corridor J that's coming to the north, it'll be centered around those really heavily trafficked regional areas and not like in town center.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments? Anybody?
The other question I have is on this table we have, or we're coming up with new zoning, the mixed use, the business park. Our current zoning map doesn't have any of those.
It does not.
how do we incorporate that?
So, as we've talked about, this is a process, it's a step-by-step process, so after we get the code adopted and shored up, the intent is to do a zoning map update to correct what we have on the ground now to what it should be zoned as, and then any future projects that come in the meantime will be zoned according to the new code. So it's all a step-by-step process, but we can't change the zoning map until we change the zoning code. So this is that first hurdle we have to get over, but the full intent is to completely make our city limits comply with what's in our code and get everything. I mean, we have things that are zoned commercial that are definitely industrial and should be industrial and vice versa, and it's a pretty big cleanup effort, but it's on our next.
When do you anticipate being able to get the zoning map put together? I mean, that, we're gonna, if this passes and goes on to the city council and they pass it and agree to it, then.
As quickly as possible, so.
Which is, come on, I'm gonna nail you down here now.
Okay, my hope is, let's say timelines run smoothly, we recommend approval at this meeting, we adopt in the February council meeting. My plan is to start working on that in, February. We do have to do notices for that, so it's a citywide notice, cause it's citywide rezoning. So my intent would be end of March, beginning of April, having a map ready for adoption, but a lot of it depends on public comment, I don't know.
That's reasonable.
I think so.
That's absolutely reasonable
But
for
we
the
need to
task.
quick.
I get that,
I
but this
agree.
is a monumental
I know,
task
I know.
that's going on, so
I'm
that's a good task line, that's a good base.
If we can push it ahead, we'll absolutely do what we can, but, the biggest part of this is giving residents the opportunity to come in and talk. We'll have multiple open houses to talk about it. It's definitely not gonna be, any kind of quick ordeal. And then we have special overlay districts right now that are established, and part of talking to them about their zoning map update is also saying, you know, hey, you live in this neighborhood, what do you want it to look like? Where do you want business in Old Town? Or, you know, do you not want business at all? And that's something that we'll have to address. So my intent is to get the zoning map done March, April timeframe, but the fine tuning it, especially with residents, I think this is the first step in getting there, just because of the fact that it's a very intense conversation. And historically, there hasn't been a lot of input given or received well or anything to that effect. So it's really, we're gonna do it right this time and make sure everything's good to go. So I'd love to say April adoption, but a lot of it'll depend on comments.
I have a question. I didn't see, we talked about it during the zoning, are we implementing anything that's like standard, like sidewalks, or is any of that gonna happen, like, I know like some communities like add 2 trees, or, I feel like that's probably still something that should be mandatory going forward, cause I know that a lot of people say that they want sidewalks, so if you bring your community or whatever, remember we were talking about that, like, industrial areas have that certain structure, have we agreed on anything on that, or is that still something we have to work on?
So sidewalks specifically are in design and construction standards, they're not in the zoning code, so they're required throughout the city regardless of what your zoning is. The trees we can address in another section of the code. I have no problem adding that in this update as well.
Okay.
It's just something
Like you
that
said, we're just trying to get to a standard where it's like, okay, everybody,
across the board.
that way it's not like, oh, well, you're whatever, you give more.
Right, so we do have an existing sidewalk ordinance, it's not the best, it needs to be fine tuned a little bit, but we'll make it across the board, it's a
Yeah.
flat design and construction standards, you gotta do it regardless of what your project is.
I will say that we have thought about those things ahead of time. For instance, like the front setback reduction on rear loaded lots. Right, one of the reasons we're leaving that space is because we know we're gonna wanna plant a tree there or something. So we have made sure that whatever we've done here still sets you up for success.
Okay.
With the subdivision standards.
The last question I have is, I don't see anything with impervious coverage, is that something that gets incorporated?
That's the hardest part. I apologize. I forgot to mention it because it's not on the table anymore. We did decide to go away from maximum impervious cover requirements. A lot of that has to do with flexibility, you know, especially in your residential areas. That's not to say there won't be maximum limits ultimately established at the time of subdivision. We're just not dictating what those limits could be. very common for a single family subdivision, for example, to have something, an impervious cover limit around 45, 50, 55%. Well, if we set a blanket impervious cover requirement for a district like SF2 or SF3, you're really limiting what people can do and how people can take advantage of the flexibility we've built into the permitted use table, those limitations, and this new lot design standards table. So ultimately, this will play out just as each subdivision is developed. That engineer is going to have to work with Jordan and her team to determine how much they could detain on site, what that equates to an impervious cover per lot, and note that on a subdivision plot or something.
To follow up on that, we do have, again, design and construction standards that specifically say you can't impact your neighbors with your runoff, you can't mess with Lomar floodplain, stuff like that. We have the regulations preset in our code already. They are required to put plat notes that state their impervious cover, but this just gives them more flexibility. Yes.
So, a lot of time, there's a lot of hindsight, it seems like you hear, and maybe there was the intention to not have runoff on an adjacent property, but it starts happening, maybe because something wasn't calculated correctly. So who is responsible for that?
So as part of,
If you're going this route right here.
so as part of their plats, there should be a note that says on the plat that the HOA or the subdivision, it's a PDD or a POA, there's a whole bunch of different kinds, they're responsible for maintenance and operations of their drainage. And so that's cleaning out storm drains, that's ensuring that they're cleaning out culverts, that's maintaining their detention retention ponds or their water quality ponds. All of that, it's in their plat notes as being their obligation. It's a city standard at this point. We have it in our admin side of things. When people submit, it's one of the things we check off. If they don't have a plat note saying that, we don't approve their plat. So drainage should not be, in theory, a city problem. It's one of the things we check for on plats.
So what happens if the HOA goes under, or whatever is the owner of said property, who does it fall to if that person or people are no longer available?
At that point, it becomes a civil matter. It's similar to what the home place is experiencing with the HOA issues. It's not necessarily the end of the world. It's something that they'll figure out. The city can choose if they want to help out or participate.
That was really the main question, who chooses?
It's something that would have to be voted on by council because it's a budget amendment. It's not easy willy-nilly decision, but plat notes should cover drainage, and I don't know how typical it is that HOAs go under. When they're established right.
Probably not ever, I would say, but it's just a curiosity because we're going down this kind of little road here.
I will add though, if an engineer just designed something wrong, if the water was supposed to go east but it's going west, that is their liability as a professional engineer, and they carry insurance that's meant to cover the costs of reconstructing the error in the.
That's great.
And
Our
our engineers check calcs as well. It's part of their whole process. They have to certify that they've that they've reviewed and approved the calcs. I mean, there's a multi-step process here that I can never say never.
Totally agree with that. I
Yeah.
wouldn't expect you to say never, it's just kind of asking a what if question.
There is a state law that says you cannot divert your runoff on somebody else's property. That is a state law.
We have plenty of fail-safes. Again, every situation is different, every project is different, but we have the tools to combat any issues that may arise when it's done right.
Yeah. And I'll add some local examples of folks who don't have impervious cover requirements, or Cedar Park, Hutto. So it's not without precedent here in Central Texas.
Anybody else have any further questions? You wish to entertain a motion? We accept this?
Well, I think we need to close our council workshop.
Okay. Very good.
close your workshop, and then you'll call a special meeting, and you'll
Okay.
vote on it if you'd like.
Okay.
All right, so, we're gonna move on to agenda item number 5. I'm gonna close the city council workshop.
Okay, we'll close our planning and zoning, meeting, workshop as well, if everybody agrees to it. Any further questions? If none. We'll now open our planning and zoning work, meeting to discuss, item number, 7, discussion, consideration, and possible action regarding the recommendation to the city council regarding the update of chapter 4 of the Unified Development Code.
If I may request a modification to that, can we do, a recommendation on chapter 1 and 4 to get those definitions we included? The changes we discussed, and then any, minor modifications. So as he mentioned, we have some spelling issues. I don't wanna codify.
Yeah, you need to make sure every spell check everything, please.
Can we, I think because it's not on the agenda, we can amend that item number 7 to include.
Yes, sir.
So we'll need an amendment
Yes, sir.
made to include chapter 1.
Chapter 1, chapter 4, and any minor modifications.
Yes. So I'll entertain an amendment after we make the motion to regarding chapter 4. We gotta do chapter 4, you have to make the main motion first, which is to, make a recommendation to city council on chapter 4, the Unified Development Code. Then we have to have an amendment adding chapter 4.
I thought we could do that 1 and 4, and then the minor modifications.
And minor modifications, you can do it chapter 1 and minor modifications. You can do that all at once.
With the way the agenda was posted, we cannot, adopt, or we can't make a recommendation on chapter 1, because it was not listed on the agenda.
But if we included it as an amendment,
But it's not on the agenda.
can we or not if we include it as an amendment?
Y'all could make, it won't count for chapter 1. Chapter 1
Okay.
would always have to come back
Good
to
to
y'all for an official recommendation, because it's required for that recommendation to be made on chapter 1 to go to council, is that correct? Yes, so it
Okay, gotcha.
ultimately.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So strike out the amendment
Mhm.
that I thought we needed to have to do both, but we'll have to go and have it at another meeting, a special meeting if necessary, to adopt chapter 1 and modifications. Okay, everybody with me on that?
Okay, can you include the minor modifications for spelling corrections
Yes.
in this one?
In this one.
Yes, for chapter 4. It was posted as chapter 4 and not a blanket, UDC update, so we have to go off of what's on the posting.
So you need a motion to approve chapter 4 plus minor modifications.
And modifications. Did you make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll do a second on that one.
Moved and seconded that we, make a motion to the city council regarding chapter 4 of the Unified Development Code and its modifications.
Minor modifications.
Minor modifications. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, then that recommendation will be made to the city council. Okay? And it was a unanimous vote. Okay. Since that's all our items on agenda on our special meeting, then we will adjourn this meeting.
How quickly do you need chapter 1?
Well, so I was gonna talk to you guys after this about scheduling a special meeting. We will have, we'll have everything.
Just send me days. Most of the time I'm available, so just send me whatever day it needs to be done.
Any specific date that's not acceptable with anybody?
Probably, yeah. I mean,
All
just to come in
right,
and do
we'll
that.
make it work.
It's just to come in and do that, and then we're done. It'll be a short special meeting.
I Just type your hand.
It's okay, I don't mind coming back.
Well, I don't need, I'm trying to get done, but I couldn't.
Well, so, we'll package it up nice and pretty and we'll bring the rest of it back and we have a little
Everybody getting early, you can't see
Yes, so this is gonna be, if it wants to go in February.
I'm ready for it to go, and then let's get the.
I've read
Well, no, I was gonna say,
I know, 3 days post.
no, I was gonna, I know that's it's the same, it's
Very gently.
person that
So
they're sending.
is there a date next week that's better for everybody?
Say hi, good to see you again. Rachel.
Good to see you. Yes.
Oh,
sure, yeah.
It doesn't have to be now, you know,
Thank you.
I was valid. I mean, we're gonna put it on you, Sally.
What you got?
and if you guys do it that day, I'll do
The quicker the better. I think, we have a lot of folks hammer that.
So, thank you for everything, but I think it's so partial.
Totally fine.
And they're
But
probably.
there's 5, 15.
About 15, 20.
Okay, I will get the invite on your next calendar. We will post by the week. It'll have what you have here today, it'll have a big one.
We all.
Yeah. We did, but not.
Even this,
Oh, that's what I was gonna say, I knew I saw something.
And it's the standard year now.
Yeah.
Thank you. See you next time.
It was great seeing you.
It's always good to see you.
Find my wife something to eat. See y'all later.
Is there any questions, concerns, please let me know. We don't see everything.
Tonight is definitely a good.
Yes, ma'am.
Gang.
Well,
I had a hard time in City Hall.
I just listened for someone to say no, you can't.
I know where it's coming from. I'm trying to, one of you's gonna get it.
I always like this. Quit listening to state law, like,
I thought y'all knew. Back.
Have a good night.
Wow, you saw that.
Okay.
I don't like it.